In the initial scene, we see waves crashing over an oceanside which ultimately changes to a vehicle driving by different stores. We next see a youthful youngster kid Danny, Edward Furlong, attempting to rest yet can't because of his more established sibling Derek, Edward Norton, and his sweetheart Stacy, Firuza Recoil, having clearly sex in the following room. A vehicle drives by with 3 individuals of color inside. The vehicle stops outside Danny and Derek's home. It then shows Derek is touching Stacy's stripped body. Danny is then easing back, turning in his rest. The 3 individuals of color gradually escape their vehicle. One heads toward Derek's truck and the other by his home. The one person of color then crushes Derek's truck window, stirring Danny. Derek and Stacy are then seen in one more sexual position, her groaning turning out to be quicker. Danny gradually gets up and looks out from his window. He sees the man that broke Derek's truck window inside glancing around. This alarms Danny, so he runs into his sibling's space to find Stacy riding Derek in the cowgirl position. Danny lets Derek know what he saw, yet this alarms Stacy and Derek. Derek asks Danny how long the man has been there, and assuming he is lashed, Danny says that he doesn't have any idea. Derek removes a gun from an end table cabinet. He then, at that point, goes down to the center of the steps with Danny following him. Derek advises Danny to wait. Derek then goes to the entryway and friends out of the peephole. He then kicks the entryway in and shoots the one person of color 2 times. The man tumbles down. The other person of color makes a run for it, however Derek discharged 3 shots from his weapon, stirring things up around town with 2 of them. The other is unharmed and takes off in Derek's truck. Derek shoots numerous shots at the truck, crushing the spirit window. Danny peers down and sees the person of color harmed from the gunfire wounds. Derek then, at that point, starts to irately stroll toward him, his arm raised as though to weapon whip him. In present time, we see Danny is currently sitting in the Essentials office, ready to be called. As we move into the workplace, we hear and see Danny's set of experiences instructor, Mr. Murray, Elliot Gould, clarifying for the head, Dr. Robert Sweeney, Avery Streams, that Danny composed a book report on Mein Kampf, Hitler's collection of memoirs that subtleties his enemy of Semitic convictions. Murray tells Dr. Sweeney that he is annoyed by Danny's signal and he needs to see him rebuffed. All things being equal, Sweeney requests that Murray leave and requests that Danny step in. With an American banner toothpick dangling from his mouth, Danny ventures into the workplace and plunks down. Dr. Sweeney starts shouting at Danny, letting him know that composing what he did is hostile and he just did it since his sibling affected him and like that. Danny contends obviously, yet in the end Sweeney wins and lets him know that he is currently his new history educator. The class is designated American History X and the following task is expected tomorrow first thing: a paper on his sibling, Derek, Edward Norton, who is presently imprisoned. The following scene opens in the school washroom with 3 dark young men whipping a white kid for let the educator know that one of them cheated. Unexpectedly, Danny shows up out of one of the slows down and requests that they stop. One kid, Henry, contends with him, however Danny just blows the smoke from his cigarette into his face. The young men leave. Danny assists the white youngster from the beginning, lets him know that he really wants to with figuring out how to go to bat for himself, and they leave. Before long we see Danny heading back home from school through a recreation area where a few individuals of color are playing b-ball. One is Henry. We hear Danny start to portray the scene and we discover that before Derek went to prison, the white children in the area didn't need to fear the dark children in light of the fact that Derek made the region safe. The following scenes are flashbacks clarifying Derek's excursion from a rural white youngster for a retribution looking for racial oppressor. At the point when Danny and Derek were more youthful, a dark street pharmacist shot their dad, a LA fireman, while he was taking care of his business. Not long after that, a moderately aged racial oppressor, Cameron Alexander, Stacy Keach, searched out Derek, wanting to start another development all through the rural white youth culture. Cameron persuaded Derek that what befell his dad was a demonstration of prejudice by the individual of color and it wasn't correct, and he, or some other white youngster, ought not be terrified. Derek, a characteristic chief and splendid speaker, started gathering together terrified rural white children for his new posse and letting them know that essentially nothing remained to fear any longer. This new frenzy turned out to be so well known among the children of Venice Oceanside that Derek before long turned into a symbol. His heritage began then and proceeded with even over the course of the time he spent in prison. The night Derek was captured, 3 youthful people of color were attempting to break into his vehicle. Danny hears them and illuminates his sibling. Derek surged ground floor, weapon close by, and opened the entryway and started shooting the men. Killing 2 of the 3, Derek then requested the last man to put his upper teeth on the check and not move. He then, at that point, mercilessly kills him by trampling the rear of his head. Very quickly later, the police show up and remove Derek, who submits to them easily. As he's cuffed, Danny sees that Derek has an extremely telling grin all over. Afterward, while Danny endeavors to type Sweeney's task, he ponders the way that on the off chance that he'd been called into court to affirm against his sibling would have been indicted for first-degree murder and drawn a lot more brutal sentence. In prison, Derek attempts to find a gathering to spend time with as security from the Hispanic and dark detainees. Not excessively lengthy subsequent to showing up, he finds a gathering of racial oppressors that acknowledge him. As time passed by, Derek saw and begins to understand the trade-offs men made to remain ahead in the prison. On the grounds that the supremacists were a minority, they paid a non-white posse to guard them. At the point when he discovered that an individual racial oppressor was offering courtesies to a Mexican man, he became rankled and quit cooperating with the gathering. Afterward, Derek was doled out clothing obligation with a dark detainee named Lamont. Lamont was amicable toward Derek, yet Derek was not agreeable back, from the get-go. Before long, Lamont and Derek started to get to know one another and turned out to be great associates. Irritated that Derek had gotten to know a dark detainee and appeared to be leaving them, the posse assaults him in the shower, one of them assaulting him. The day this occurred, Dr. Sweeney, who was likewise Derek's educator, stayed with him. When he showed up, Derek separated in tears and let Sweeney know that he needed out and that he needed to take everything back and move really far away so he wouldn't hurt his family any longer. Dr. Sweeney let Derek know that it wasn't sufficient. Danny was going down a similar way and he should do whatever was vital for Danny to not wind up like him. Derek concurred and let him know that he was prepared to do anything for his sibling once he was out. After around 3 years, Derek is set free from jail and gets back to find that Danny has turned into a racial oppressor too. He likewise discovers that what was once a little following has transformed into an extensively enormous one because of Cameron's impact and Derek's legend. That evening, Danny and Derek both hit up a party that Cameron is tossing for Derek's homecoming. When there, he tracks down his former sweetheart, Stacy. Firuza recoil, and requests that she move far away with him. He tells her that he doesn't need any of this any longer, he's finished with racial domination. Following that, she inquires as to whether he's insane and runs off out of resentment. Derek searches for Danny, lastly tracks down him in Cameron's office. Derek advises Danny to leave and that there is a young lady outside sitting tight for him. After Danny leaves, Derek faces Cameron and lets him know that he's finished with the entire thing and he knows Cameron's down. Cameron had once turned over on several his own men and let them go to prison. Cameron is incensed and they begin to contend. The contention closes when Derek smacks Cameron upside the head and afterward kicks him again while he's down. Derek leaves and calls for Danny to accompany him. On out, Seth Ryan, Ethan Supley, a companion of Derek's before he went to prison, begins hollering at him and requesting a response regarding what has been going on with Cameron. Derek is dumbfounded and continues to shout for Danny. However, at that point Seth takes out a weapon and focuses it at Derek. Stacy starts to shout from the side, "Shoot him! Shoot him!" And Seth keeps on drawing nearer and closer. Similarly, as Seth is going to make it happen, Derek gets the weapon and focuses it up, then pushes him and advises him to step away. Derek calls Danny and begins to take off, firearm close by. Danny before long gets up to speed to him and Derek starts to make sense of his life in jail and his adjustment of demeanor. Despite the fact that Danny is disappointed with Derek, on the grounds that he's surrendering the main thing he thinks brings the white children trust against the non-white race, he comprehends and pardons him and they head back home. At the point when they show up, Danny starts dealing with his paper and Derek goes into the room. The two of them take a gander at one another and push toward the wall that is canvassed in racial oppressor misleading publicity. They bring everything down. At the point when they're finished, Danny gets back to the PC to compose his paper and Derek gets into the shower. The next morning, at the crack of dawn, Danny is storyteller, letting us know the finish to his story. He says that he's never watched the dawn and he trusts that this paper is what he, Dr. Sweeney, is searching for. Derek prepares for his gathering with his post-trial agent and soon they leave together. Derek strolls Danny to school before his gathering, and on their way they stop at a bistro. There, they get together with Dr. Sweeney and Chief Rasmussen. They tell Derek that Cameron and Seth were tracked down the previous evening subsequent to being bounced and they are presently in the clinic. Dr. Sweeney and Rasmussen both inquire as to whether he has a ton of familiarity with it and he swears he doesn't. Derek lets them know that he has some place to go and that he will walk Danny to school before he goes. They set off coming. As Derek is dropping him off, he stumbles over words. Lastly says, "I'll see you at home." Danny withdraws for the front entryways and Derek heads down the road. While he's strolling, the crowd can detect the trepidation in Derek. Simultaneously, Danny enters the washroom not long before class begins. What Danny doesn't know is that Henry is in the washroom too. He raises a firearm and fires Danny various times. As blood splashes against the washroom slow down, he tumbles to the ground inert. Next we see Derek is in the restroom with Danny. He sits with him and holds his body near his, very troubled. The main things we can hear between cries are the comments Derek is making to himself about what he's finished. Following, Danny's voice takes over as storyteller and we hear the end explanation of the paper he's expounded on his sibling. "So I surmise this is where I let you know what I realized, my decision, correct? All things considered, my decision is, disdain is stuff. Life's too short to be in any way irritated constantly. It's simply not worth the effort." Derek says finishing a paper with a quote is in every case great. He says another person has proactively said all that needed to be said. So on the off chance that you can't top it, take from them and go areas of strength for out. So I picked a person I thought you'd like. We are not foes, but rather companions. We should not be foes. However energy might have stressed, it should not break our obligations of love. The spiritualist harmonies of memory will expand when again contacted, as doubtlessly they will be, by the better heavenly messengers of our inclination. We see a picture of Venice oceanside as waves crash over the nightfall, then, at that point, the credits begin to roll.